2001, British journalist Yvonne Ridley was captured by Taliban forces under accusations of being a spy, and then imprisoned in one of their hellish camps. But after 11 days of isolation, Ridley was unexpectedly released, and to date, she remains one of the few people to have seen the inside of a Taliban jail and lived to tell the story. Like, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell for weekly chilling crime content. But when Ridley returned home, her behavior drastically changed. She was no longer the person she once was, instead embracing Islam and evolving into a devout, anti-British extremist. What happened to Yvonne Ridley during her imprisonment is both mysterious and disturbing. Yvonne Ridley. On April 23, 1958, Yvonne Ridley was born in the urban town of Stanley in County Durham. From a young age, Ridley threw herself into the world of journalism, first working at local Durham newspapers in her late teens and early 20s. Very soon, she moved on to more established newspapers, eventually landing herself jobs at the most prestigious newspapers in the UK. Throughout her career, she worked for The Independent, The Daily Mirror, The Sunday Express, The Daily Mail, The Sunday Times, and The News of the World, certifying herself as one of the country's most respected journalists. In 2001, her work for The Sunday Express took Ridley to Afghanistan for post-9/11 coverage. Following in the footsteps of similar reporters, Ridley decided to cross the Afghanistan border disguised in a burqa, having previously been refused an entrance visa by Afghanistan officials. On September 26, 2001, Ridley crossed into Afghanistan and spent 2 days undercover. It was on her return to the U.S., traveling with her guides, that the donkey she was on traveling bolted, causing her camera to be spotted by a patrolling Taliban soldier. Her true identity was quickly uncovered, and so Taliban forces captured her under suspicion of being a spy, a severe crime that carried a death sentence. Given that hostility between Afghanistan and the U.S. had just reached critical mass, many people believed that Ridley would not be leaving Afghanistan alive. Imprisonment. For 7 days, the Taliban kept Ridley in solitary confinement, then moved her to a prison in Kabul. It was here that Ridley met a Christian missionary named Heather Mercer, who'd been captured under similar circumstances. Negotiations for Ridley's release began the day of her capture. Richard Desmond, one of the owners of the Sunday Express, dispatched a team of officials to negotiate with Taliban forces. The interaction took place at the Afghan embassy in Islamabad, Pakistan. Bizarrely, Ridley's captors demanded nothing in the way of money or exposure. Instead, they requested proof that Ridley was indeed a journalist. Fearing their retaliation, negotiators were reluctant to give over the information that Ridley was indeed a high-profile journalist. However, as the pressures mounted regarding Ridley's life, they eventually yielded. And to everyone's shock, Yvonne Ridley was escorted to the border and handed over to Pakistani authorities on October 8, 2001, without harm. Ridley was able to return to her old life, but that's when Ridley's new personality suddenly emerged. Like, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell for weekly chilling crime content. Let us know in the comments who you'd like us to cover next. Conversion to Islam. Very little is known about what Yvonne Ridley actually endured during her imprisonment. Although she has remained tight-lipped about the fine details, she claims that although she had been starved, her physical harm was non-existent. Following her release, Ridley claimed that during her incarceration, her captors requested that she convert to Islam. However, Ridley refused, but promised that she would read the Quran in its entirety when she returned home. In freedom, she kept this promise. She said partly to find out why the Taliban treated women as they do. Looking for her answer, she unfortunately didn't find one, and instead discovered something much more profound. Ridley then claimed that reading the Quran changed her life more ways than she anticipated. She said, "The Quran makes it clear that women are equal in spirituality, worth, and education. What everyone forgets is that Islam is perfect. People are not." Ridley also claimed that the Quran is a Magna Carta for women. In August 2003, she officially declared her allegiance to the Islamic faith, claiming that newfound religion has fixed all of the problems she previously suffered with. When comparing her treatment to female prisoners held in American custody, she said that Taliban custody gave her full privacy as a woman and was handed the key to the door of her cell to lock from the inside. Whether these claims are true remain a mystery. Advocacy of Islam. Since her conversion in 2003, Yvonne Ridley has become a spokesperson for Islam in the Western world. The same year, she was employed by the media organization Al Jazeera, where she worked as a senior editor, helping to launch the English version of their website. 2 years later, she began presenting her own political and current affairs program on the UK's Islam Channel. She regularly works as a freelance journalist covering Islamic-based events and terrorist acts. She has been incredibly outspoken against British politics and affairs, with many people comparing her comments to hate speech, often found preached by Islamic extremist and terrorist sympathizers. She has passively justified the existence of terrorist beheading videos and female genital mutilation. Ridley has praised a terrorist leader who orchestrated a school massacre in Belzin, Russia, referring to him as a shaheed, which roughly translates to martyr. In 2006, Ridley urged all British Muslims to boycott the police and refuse to cooperate with them in any way, shape, or form until the boys are released in relation to 2 Muslim men being apprehended by police under the belief they possessed explosives. Her comments were labeled madness by government officials. In 2012, Ridley was also outspoken against the deportation of notorious hate preacher Abu Qatada from the UK back to Afghanistan. Claims of Stockholm Syndrome. As is the case of most kidnapped victims who subsequently discuss their ordeals following their escapes, Yvonne Ridley denies suffering from any kind of psychological trauma as a result of her capture. In an online post following her conversion, Yvonne Ridley made the following claims. "I have been accused of suffering from Stockholm Syndrome as a result of spending 10 days in the hands of the Taliban. It is true, my journey did begin in the unlikely surroundings of an Afghan prison, where I was being held by the Taliban, facing charges of spying for entering their country illegally disguised in the all-enveloping burqa. I remember the day very clearly. Hamid, my interpreter, said I had a very important visitor and that I must be respectful. My heart skipped a beat as a tall man wearing long flowing white robes and a turban walked into my room. I realized immediately he was a religious cleric. He asked me about my religious status, Protestant, and then asked me what I thought of Islam and if I would like to convert. I was terrified. For 5 days, I had managed to avoid the subject of religion in a country led by extremists. If I gave the wrong response, I had convinced myself I would be stoned to death. After careful thought, I thanked the cleric for his generous offer and said it was difficult for me to make such a life-changing decision while I was in prison. However, I did make a promise that if I was released, I would study Islam on my return to London. My reward for such a reply was being sent to a primitive jail in Kabul. My captors had treated me with courtesy and respect, and so, in turn, I kept my word and set out to study their religion. It was supposed to be an academic venture, but as I became more engrossed with each page I turned, I became more impressed with what I read. What really happened to Yvonne Ridley? When discussing her ordeal, Ridley goes to great lengths to maintain the illusion that she was in control. She regularly mentions how she abused her Taliban captives during her imprisonment. Yet, on several occasions, she mentions her fear of being executed due to her religious beliefs. Even for a woman of such strong character, it's unfathomable to think that someone might hurl abuse at religious extremists who are known for mass execution of Western civilians. Exactly how many white Western people convert to Islam is unknown, yet it is quite clearly a very small number in comparison to the general population. The fact that one of the women to convert to Islam, especially in a time when the Western world was fighting a war on terror against Islamic extremists, was someone who was kept imprisoned by them, is a strange coincidence. Executing Yvonne Ridley would have sent a direct message to the Western world that the Taliban were a force to be reckoned with. This is something they have done many times in the past, particularly in the years since Ridley's ordeal. The Taliban, a notoriously unstable faction who are not known for their compliances with other cultures, set Yvonne Ridley free for a reason. Another strange coincidence is that of the few hostages who the Taliban have allowed to leave their prisons alive. One of them happens to be a high-profile journalist with a reach of millions of people in the Western world. At a time when the Islamic people were considered the nation's enemies, it would be very beneficial for them to commandeer a spokesperson amidst Western media. It's possible that Yvonne Ridley may simply be carrying out the Taliban's wishes out of fear for her recapture or execution. As a high-profile figure in the UK, Ridley is easily recognizable should anyone search for her. During her incarceration in Afghanistan, Islamic forces might have demanded Ridley speak highly of them in exchange for her life. In the 20-plus years since Yvonne Ridley's ordeal, her allegiance to the Islamic faith has only grown. She began as a simple preacher, informing others of the benefits of converting to the religion. It has then evolved into fully fledged anti-Britain hate speech. Some theories suggest that Yvonne Ridley converted to Islam as a way to cope with the trauma suffered at the hands of Afghanistan forces. She likely found herself in a surreal environment, fending for her life, unaware of her fate. She may have even accepted the possibility that her imprisonment meant her death. Coming to terms with such an extreme prospect can affect a person in a way their conscious mind couldn't rationalize. Converting to Islam may be Yvonne Ridley's way of addressing her trauma in a manageable way. To this day, Yvonne Ridley rejects any claims that she suffered Stockholm Syndrome during her imprisonment. All evidence points to Ridley struggling to come to terms with what she's been through, but the truth about what happened to her during her imprisonment will remain a mystery to everyone except Ridley and her captors. Like, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell for weekly chilling crime content. Let us know in the comments who you'd like us to cover next.